Can you make sure that they can be seen on the live stream too, where the chairs are? That one works. This one worked. You know who this is? Good, how are you? I was going to see you for the first time in a long time. I don't even get to see you when I go to the doctor's office. Yeah, but I only work in the afternoons now, and babies come in the morning. So hi, I miss you.
Sean, we're going to see how this works with the mic.
Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test.
One last time, Sean.
Can you hear me now? Test, 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 test. Test. Hey Ryan, I can also just call you if that's easier.
Maybe. I don't know. What do you think? Speakers right now. Yeah, that's the thing.
Sean?
All right, we'll figure it out. Good evening, everybody. For those of you guys who don't know me and everybody zooming in, my name is Ryan Nichols. I'm Claire's son. I'm also a full-time firefighter paramedic in the city of West Haven as my full-time job. So I'm going to just introduce who we have here this evening. Starting over here, we have Betsy Gehan, who's going to be talking about her experiences with her daughter. We have Officer Joanne Shove, who has just been a phenomenal resource to us. George is going to talk about his experiences with the funeral home. We have Sean Scanlon, who's been very instrumental in making sure that we change the way opiates are prescribed and the way that people get them and just the sharing of information. And he's with us on Zoom. And then we have Tim Harmon, who's going to go through his experiences with his life and what he does now. So I'm actually going to let Betsy start off this evening and tell her story.
Hi, everybody. I am Betsy Gehan, and this is my daughter, Martine. And I'm here to talk to you about the reality of addiction. My daughter lost her life at the age of 26. She was just like you guys. She had her whole life ahead of her, and she was in her senior year. She was co-captain of the girls' ice hockey team. She was well-liked and very much loved. And she was looking forward to graduating high school and going on to school in California. She was on her way in search of the California dream. Now, I know you all say it's not going to happen to me, but the reality is, do you think Martine chose to use and said, I think I'm going to become an addict? Nobody chooses to become an addict. I think the only way, sure, not to become is to never start using. Martine was a strong, confident, and independent thinker. She marched to her own drum. She had dreadlocks in 10th grade and kept them until she passed. She didn't care if people judged her, so I questioned, why did she use? Why did she start? Did she go along with the crowd? She started to use hard drugs, I believe, when she was out in California, because she came back a full-blown addict. That's when she cared about what people thought about her. She was so ashamed to tell anyone, to reach out to friends or family. She didn't want anybody to know. She went to a clinic in New Haven all by herself. She was only on oxycodone at the time and went to the methadone clinic in New Haven. Big mistake, because at that point she was only on oxycodone, and it would have been much easier to get off the oxys than it ever would be to get off heroin. She didn't want her father or me to know, or her brother or her brother, so she struggled with this all by herself for a couple months before one of her best friend's sisters told me what was going on. Now all the cards are on the table, and we're going to fight like hell to get her better. But the stigma that came along with this addiction and the loneliness, not just for her, but for the whole family, because she didn't want her cousins to know, she didn't want her aunts or uncles, but most of all, she didn't want her grandmother to know. I didn't want my friends to know either. I didn't want her to be judged. I thought she would get better. And she did get better for a while, and she was doing well. She went to Rwanda and volunteered. She went back to school, and we thought we could put this behind us. But it's an awful disease, and it doesn't let go easily. Certainly not as easily as it lets you slip into it. I don't know what made her start using again. A broken heart? A missed opportunity? Who knows? But that's a person struggling with substance use disorder go to. We kept quiet about her struggles, and that was our big mistake. Things are different now than they were in 2013. Substance use disorder is known as an epidemic and a disease. I think if you know somebody that's struggling, the best thing you could do is talk to them about it and tell other people, so it's not a stigma and it's not a secret. Reach out to them with love and understanding. Why are people using? Because they're in pain? Because they're trying to feel normal? Trying to be loved? Or just trying to fit in? Or maybe even just something new. But the drugs are so strong it can take over instantly, and it doesn't let go. Believe me when I tell you, the answers are not in the drugs or the numbness. The answers are in talking and reaching out and offering love and understanding. Love and understanding in your everyday life when you're hurting because maybe your friend died. Don't turn to drugs or alcohol. Turn to your friends and talk. Turn to your journals and write. Seek out help. Get professional help. Just don't hide in the numbness. So I know you all know somebody that's struggling, whether it be friends or family, alcohol or drugs. But if you need some help, my name is Betsy Gehan. Reach out. People care. People want to help. My phone number's in the book. I'm on Facebook. I've helped a lot of people, and I'm here to listen and help. My motto is offer help, get help. Thank you.
I'm comfortable. Luckily, I got vaccinated a couple weeks ago. So, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of bring you guys now through a little bit when we get called for an overdose, what happens in the order of events and stuff like that. There's a lot of misinformation and misrepresentation about what we can do and what we can't do. When Narcan is talked about all the time now, right? People can get it for free at CVS, and they think it's this magic drug, and police officers everywhere are giving it to diabetics all the time. It can only do so much, right? So what Narcan does is when somebody gets high on heroin and they become unresponsive, what happens is their breathing actually slows down. So what kills them is respiratory arrest. So respiratory arrest leads to cardiac arrest. So what Narcan does is Narcan actually goes and competes with the drug that's causing that, right? So you take heroin, slows your breathing down until basically you're what we call apneic, or not breathing at all. Narcan comes in and kind of kicks the heroin off those receptors and brings you back. The problem is that if you've already stopped breathing and your heart is not perfusing or beating at all, Narcan's not going to work. Narcan's not going to fix you because unfortunately the damage has already been done. We watch all these, there's medical shows all over the place now on TV and stuff like that, and you see somebody with a flat line, right? We call it asystole, and they come in and they shock this patient. They bring them back to life like they're jump-starting somebody's heart. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. We can only actually shock two rhythms, and what we're actually looking to do when we shock somebody is stop their heart, because it resets it. It resets the electrical activity to a normal rhythm. So when we go and we have somebody that is flatlined in asystole, there's not a whole lot we can do for that in terms of electricity to fix that, because it's already stopped. When we go to somebody and we're trying to get IV access, so we're trying to get medication into their veins, and if we can't do that, we actually have a little drill, and we actually can what's called an IO. We actually drill into somebody's bone in order to provide that medication, and it has basically the same effect that it does starting an IV. When we intubate people, put breathing tubes in people, and nowadays we see these medications and these drugs that people are taking, and these heroin that's cut with fentanyl. They call it carfentanil. All these synthetic opiates, right? So they're causing just such a worse response than we've seen before. And so we used to give our starting dose for Narcan was like 0.4 to 2 milligrams, and now pretty frequently we're actually giving 4 milligrams. So we're doubling our doses, we're tripling our doses because of the stuff that is coming out nowadays is just so much more potent and is just taking such a drastic effect on people. And when somebody comes back, if we go to an overdose, we're pretty much fairly quickly able to tell what's going on. Usually they're not breathing very well. Usually their pupils are pinpoint, what we call it. So we look at their pupils, we tell that they're pinpoint, and we're able to get them back using Narcan. Usually it's always the same response, and it's like one of those things where we ask, and we already know the answer to. When we ask, what'd you take? They'll be like, what are you talking about? I didn't take anything. Narcan is kind of like a truth serum, because It only works on one thing. It only works on opiates. It doesn't work on anything else. If you took cocaine, you're going to have a completely different response. If you took like Xanax or a benzo, it causes a similar response, but Narcan does not work on it, right? So when we give Narcan, we know that somebody has taken something. We know that there's some kind of opiate, heroin, however they took it. Sometimes there's no track marks, which is what we look for on people's arms and stuff like that. But there's this, people just, again, think that they're going to get in trouble, which most of the times the officers are just looking to make sure that the person is safe, gets to the hospital, gets treatment. But we try to talk to people, and we come across, about a year and a half ago, I came across this 20-year-old girl. She was in a basement, nasty basement in West Haven. It was cold, it was dirty. There was an old mattress on the floor, and this 20-year-old girl, and she was actually from Clinton. And you just look at her, and she's just, her skin is terrible. Her face is just tired. She's not well taken care of. And I look at her ID, and it's a picture of this beautiful young girl, and what her life has become, and the addiction that's taken over her. And now she's in this basement with her boyfriend, this nasty mattress, and just fighting to get a hold of her life still. You bring her back and you talk to her, and unfortunately, the things that we deal with, the hospitals really can't hold on to these people. So for the most part, people who overdose, a lot of the times they're discharged before I've even finished my report. So although people are trying to constantly give help, a lot of the times these people don't want help, or they're not, they don't admit that they have a problem yet. A couple weeks ago, I took a guy that was, again, not breathing. We had to actually breathe for him for a little while I got the IV in him, gave him the Narcan. And he was at one of his friend's house, and he had actually somehow taken this guy's Christmas tree, thrown it across the room, and was now unconscious on the floor, not really breathing. Woke him up again, and said, do you know what he takes? Do you know what he did? And again, a friend said, I don't know, this happened at work a couple weeks ago. Same answer that we normally get from people. Hey, what'd you take? He wakes back up, and we're talking to him, and we know something's going on. You need to get help and stuff like that. We can talk to these people for as long as we have them. But unfortunately, unless the person realizes they have a problem or are actually seeking treatment, there's not a whole lot we can do. And unfortunately, we tend to actually run into a lot of the same people over and over again because their addiction does get the better of them. They continuously overdose, and we actually gain a relationship with these people. Usually, we're on first-name basis with a lot of them. It's so hard to kick this addiction. Once you start it, usually the only thing that fixes it is death, right? We don't see a whole lot of people recover from this. So our goal is to make sure that you guys, obviously we don't think that heroin is a huge problem in Guilford High School, thank God. The whole idea is to make sure that you guys have the information and the knowledge to avoid that path and to avoid things that might lead you down that road. We talk about cocaine and stuff like that and how it causes this huge dopamine effect, and then your body wants to have this big dopamine release again. You constantly search for that high, and the only thing you care about is getting that high, and it just destroys people. I actually pronounced somebody dead last summer, and the guy was on the younger side. He was in his late 30s. I think he was like 38, 39, and he had been struggling with addiction. He wasn't homeless. He worked 40 hours a week, probably overtime too. He was a electrician, and him and his wife were trying to work through it. He was trying to get help. He was, him and his wife were having some issues, so he was sleeping downstairs. And at about 6 a.m. in the morning, I got dispatched for the unresponsive person in the basement. And his wife was on scene. She was in the kitchen. She said, my husband's down there. I think he's dead. At some point in the middle of the night, he had used heroin, and he had passed away, so his breathing had stopped and brought him into cardiac arrest. So now, here's his wife, who was, trying to deal with it, and what resonates with me is he had 2 young daughters upstairs, and they were trying to leave their room to get ready for their school day, and the wife was just crying, saying, you can't come out, you gotta stay in your room. You're not able to tell them what's going on yet, as their father is dead downstairs, You know, they don't know this. They probably didn't know that he was fighting an addiction, and now these kids are going to grow up without their father, who, again, was a hardworking guy, working, you know, every day, trying to provide for his family, and this addiction just killed him. And it's just such a terrible thing to see, when you see what it does to people and what it does to their families. And, you know, this family is forever going to be changed by addiction. Betsy's life is forever changed by addiction. The goal is to make sure that, again, you guys don't go down that path. And one of the things that we, you know, Sean has done an excellent job. We used to see a lot of people that would have surgeries, and they would get prescribed this huge amount of pain medication. And it would sit on their shelves, and at some point, you have a little, you know, ankle pain or something like that. You start taking pills and stuff like that, and then before you know it, you're reliant on this pain medication, these opiates, to get through the day. And then once your pain medicine is out, now you start looking for other ways because you can't get the prescription. You're trying to, you know, find a doctor that will prescribe you something or what's going on. And then when you can't get through that, you turn to, you know, street pharmacists, what we call them, heroin dealers, people who have these ways for you to get that feeling like you can function, but you're not functioning. You're just, you know, basically surviving until your next high. And again, I've worked all over this region, all over New Haven County. It happens in Madison, it happens in Guilford, it happens in West Haven, New Haven, East Haven. I've had, you know, overdoses at work, people, UPS men, FedEx men, you know, overdosing their trucks. It's just this thing that is so terrible and it's just so hard to kick. And we've just really tried, throughout the years, try to tell you guys and inform you guys what goes on with it and why it's so bad and why it's so hard to get rid of. So from my perspective and stuff like that, so let's, you know, going back to the gentleman that I pronounced, unfortunately, there was nothing that we could do. He'd been dead for too long already. And then what would happen is after I pronounce him dead, you know, police come on, they do their investigation, and which is going to lead us to Officer Shove, who unfortunately has had to deal with it here in Guilford as well. Like I said, it doesn't matter. So she's going to give you her perspective and what happens there.
Thank you all for being here. It's a very important topic that we're talking about, and I'm not sure if you were told before you were coming here what we were talking about today. And you're probably sitting here saying, I don't use drugs. I'm never going to use heroin. And no one ever says, I want to be a drug addict. No one says, I want to shoot heroin. It's not something anyone says, but what we want to do is give you the tools that as you go on in life and have new experiences and new relationships and decisions to make, that you have some kind of knowledge in the back of your head and you think about this talk and say, oh, I remember that talk, you know, and because it truly does happen here. I'm coming up on my 19th year here and I've seen a lot of overdoses, and I'm one officer in this department. So with that being said, what typically happens on our side is we'll get dispatched to something along with the fire department here, usually unresponsive or it could come in as a possible overdose. The first thing when we get there is your first job is life-saving measures. We do carry Narcan. Most police officers now in the state of Connecticut, different departments do carry it. So what that is, it's the drug. It's a nasal one that we can insert into their nose should we suspect that it's a heroin overdose. It's not going to hurt someone if we give it to them if that's not what was taken or what was going on, and we have had to use this. In the same respect, CPR is conducted to try to, bring someone back. Fire department obviously will be there on scene, whether we're there together or, so they're gonna do their life-saving measures. They're gonna push, like Ryan said, different medications. CPR, here they have something called the Lucas machine that they'll put on someone that literally does the compressions for someone. And they will work on someone for sometimes up to about 45 minutes. All while the family members are there, they're crying, they're hysterical. It's an awful, awful scene, and it's something that I've seen way too many times. So there's the times when, yes, someone can be brought back, which is a wonderful time, and they could be transported to the hospital, but sometimes they don't want to go to the hospital. And then there's the other times where they don't make it, and then it's considered a crime scene. So on our side, you're looking at it saying, okay, what did they take? Where did it come from? So certain things will happen during that. A detective is going to come out. Everything is going to be photographed. Cell phones now are seized because they're trying to figure out where these drugs are coming from. I'm not talking about like, you know, the low-level person that's selling the drugs. I'm talking about the higher up. Where are these drugs coming from? And investigations happen with the FBI, the DEA. Sometimes there's luck and there's arrests that are made, and other times they're not. But the bottom line is still that loved one is not alive anymore. There's a lot of questions that are asked. You need a 24-hour timeline of where were they, when was the last time you saw them alive. It's an awful situation. It's awful for the people that are there, and it's awful for us as officers that have to be there, because we all have family members and loved ones, and we all feel pain, and we can feel when someone else has pain. We also have to do things. So say it doesn't happen in our town, like unfortunately in the case for Betsy, we had to go and make a notification to her. It wasn't myself, but it was people that I work with. I had to go there at 2 o'clock in the morning and knock on her door and tell her that her daughter died in a hotel of an overdose. It gives me the chills talking about it, because as a mother, that hurts. Like, no parent ever wants that. No one ever wants 2 police officers coming to their house at 2 o'clock in the morning, knocking on the door and saying, "I'm sorry." But it's a reality, unfortunately. And I love to see that you're here, because I can't wait for you to hear his story. This is success, and it's fantastic. So that's kind of our part of it. Again, there's a lot of follow-up that goes on afterwards. What typically happens is the loved one is then released to the medical examiner. You don't go directly to a funeral home when you have an overdose. So the medical examiner has to come down, and they do an investigation, and then your loved one is brought to the medical examiner's office, where they conduct an autopsy. An autopsy, the results for toxicology can take about 6 weeks to get those answers about what drugs were in your loved one's systems. That's a long time for a family member to wait and find out what exactly what was in them. And that's running about 6 weeks. The last one was about 6 weeks. The results just came back in. So it does happen here. Addiction affects everyone. There's not someone, I haven't come across one person that doesn't know someone who knows someone with addiction. And it's just speak up, help somebody out, offer help. Don't look the other way. Don't pretend like it doesn't exist. Look out for your friends. If you see someone's making bad decisions, if you see someone is using substances to cope with anxiety, depression, COVID, all of this, our lives are turned upside down. We've never had to wear masks the whole past year now with this. So really, really reach out for each other and help each other out, okay? I will move you to George.
Hello, thank you for being here. So my name is George Sullivan. I work at our family's funeral home downtown, right here in Guilford. And so as Officer Shobe mentioned, from the medical examiner, very often they would call somebody like us, and we have to bring the deceased up to the medical examiner's office, and then they do an examination of the person, and it's extensively thorough. And in the meantime, like everyone else had mentioned, the family is scratching their heads, wondering what's going on, and they have no answers. It is probably the most horrific thing you've ever seen, aside from maybe war or anything that possibly could happen like that. It's just, you can't make sense of it. Everyone's, maybe a child sitting there trying to get ready to go to school. The family's asking 1,000 different questions to everybody in the room, and everyone's trying to piece it together as best they can. It just doesn't really make much sense at all at the time. So when the medical examiner takes a person into their care, they have to do, again, it's a full examination, which autopsy-wise, there's a couple of shows that you can see on TV that would give you some things, not that you want to look it up Google-wise, but they examine every single organ of your body, including your skull. And they take it out and look at it, and then give us back the pieces. So any friends or anybody else like that, they're definitely not thinking of this when they're doing it, obviously. So we have to then, after that period, the 6 weeks goes by when they're doing toxicology things. They have to research a lot of that, and they maybe get back 6 weeks. And the family would only get their report. Nobody else does, not me. Nobody else. We help them fill out the forms. In the meantime, while we're there explaining how that process works with the family, the police have already told them. some of the paramedics do those things. We then have to sit with them and go through that again, just because everything's sort of going in one, out in the other. And then we have to figure out what they would like to do with the person, whether it be a funeral, and possibly put everything back together as best we can, and maybe have a casket service, come here to St. George or many other churches in town. I've done this, I've lost count how many times we've done this with just kids. So everyone's heard a lot of numbers in town. The usual death rate in a small town like this is about 1%. Cities are different because there's more population. That's what everybody got scared about the COVID stuff. It started spiking, death rates and things like that, and colds and whatever. So just to take in perspective, I do probably less than about 200 funerals a year. Just at Guilford's about 22,000 people. You can do the math on that. It's pretty easy. So in town alone, 1 year, I think we did 13 overdoses in 1 year. That's more than one a month. So I don't like to see anybody pass away. Definitely not kids. This ranged from teenagers all the way to something like 30. Ryan was saying that before. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care. These drugs don't care for anything, anybody or anything. They'll take anyone. So it's an unfortunate thing, and the best we can try to get through with it. And talking to somebody and friends and calling it out when you see it. So just don't let it go.
All right. My name is Tim. Remind me of everybody's age, because I'm going to ask that like 14 times. I'm going to forget each time. Perfect. Great. All right. So a quick little background about me. I did grow up in Guilford, so I have sat in the exact same seats. CCD, is that what we're doing right now? Okay. I've been in these seats before. And I've heard the same story, and I'm not going to stand up here and give what's that show, like Beyond Scared Straight, because I don't necessarily believe in that. I'm more into education, as well as personal experience. So what we already mentioned, I am on the more fortunate end, what they would, I guess, consider a success story from this. So just a quick little background about me. Again, I grew up in Guilford. And I didn't necessarily have a horrible life. I had a fantastic life, great upbringing. How many siblings do I have? I'm one of 8 children. I say that obviously just for background, but 2, also I think it's important. From personal experience as well as professional experience, I'm under the understanding that this is you do have a genetic predisposition to addiction, if we want to label it as that. So again, going back to my family, I'd say about 80% of them had addictive personalities. I'm not necessarily just referring to opiates, and it doesn't necessarily have to be alcohol or drugs as well. I'm under the belief that addiction spreads way beyond that. So again, I mentioned that just for a little bit of background. But again, I had a fantastic upbringing. I was social in school. I had plenty of friends. I was athletic. And again, I guess I say that because, we had brought up earlier, why do people start using drugs? And for me, at least, a lot of it was curiosity. A lot of it was people around me were using, and it kind of just got put in front of me, so I said, why not? So for me, the first time I used, I was probably, 27 now. I'm going to say like 13 or 14. So I would guess I was like an early bloomer. I drank for the first time. I didn't have any white light experience like, holy cow, this is the coolest thing in the world. I'm going to do it forever. Didn't happen. Smoked weed like a year later, and then this light switch kind of went off in my head of like, okay, this is great. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. Like, things are fantastic. And I say that just to kind of be genuine. Smoking weed it could be harmless for a lot of people. It could also be detrimental. Whether or not marijuana is a gateway drug is addiction in general is controversial. There's debates for days, and there will continue to be debates. I'm under the understanding that it is a gateway drug, at least it was from my experience. So for me, again, I smoked weed when I was probably 14. What grade are you in 14? 8th grade, 7th grade, give or take, we'll say that. And then, quickly just started finding trouble. So back when I was in CCD, I started acting out in school. My parents' attempt to save me was to send me off to an all-boys school in Middletown, Xavier High School, which was horrible. But basically, when I got to high school is kind of when things like the chains came off. I was introduced to cocaine, Xanax, opiates, a little bit of hallucinogens. And again, for me, it wasn't, I had heard these speeches before of how bad things were, and I didn't necessarily listen to any of it. But at that time, I was smoking weed every day, and it was really a matter of who I was hanging out or surrounding myself by. That didn't help. A year and a half went by, and again, I'm just getting in trouble. I eventually had several interactions with the law, more than once. So fast forward a little bit, because I'm going to try and give you guys the elevator version. So I got asked to leave Xavier as a sophomore in high school because I was dealing drugs, and they don't necessarily like when you do that in school. So they asked me to leave and not come back. And then like a month into my junior year in high school, so by that time, again, I had tried a good amount of drugs. I got my hands on a prescription of morphine. Morphine is, for those that do not know, it's, yes, an opiate. One of the stronger ones, so if you go to the hospital to get a surgery, they're most likely going to give you morphine or Dilaudid, or there's a handful of other ones. But morphine, again, is very, very strong. And I knew that. It doesn't really matter how I got it, but I got it. And so it was actually in October, I think it was the anniversary. I was 17 at that time. So again, quick elevator version, I had swallowed between like 2,000 and 3,000 milligrams of morphine, which is enough to kill probably like 2 or 3 horses. My mother found me, so she and still is a very active person. She swims at 4 in the morning, and she heard me down the hall, what they refer to, I believe, is called agonal breathing. My medical professionals over here is agonal breathing. So it's kind of like it's what they refer to as the death rattle. So it's terrifying. And essentially what it is somebody's like last gasp of breath. So that's what my mother heard. Thankfully that she woke up that morning to go swimming, and that she was a registered nurse at the time. She found me. And I always think about like how she tells this story, because I've done panels with her, and it's kind of like you can hear a pin drop type of thing. I get goosebumps just thinking of how she talks about it, but essentially she said I was gray in the face, like your sweatshirt right there. I was swallowing my own throw up. I was very, very cold, basically on the verge of dying. Being in a registered nurse, she started resuscitating me for like 30 minutes, and then when EMS arrived, they gave me a shot of Narcan. I came back for a couple minutes, then went back under, gave me a second shot of Narcan, and I woke up 3 days later. So this is what Ryan was saying of like, unfortunately, when it comes to addiction, and I myself identify as somebody who is a drug addict and an alcoholic, you can't force anybody to want to get help, which is the really tough part. So again, I was 17 at the time. I had overdosed on opiates and woke up 3 days later. And when I woke up, I spent 8 days in ICU, learning how to walk again, and I didn't think I had a problem. I wasn't done doing what I was doing. I went to rehab for like 120 days, and I just kind of played this game of like, I'm going to do what people, or tell them what they want to hear, because I'm 17, and I don't have a problem, I'm just having fun. Unfortunately, that was not the case, so I kind of continuously did what I was doing. I had a pretty severe interaction with the law, to the point where when I was 19, I caught a felony, 2 actually, and so to make a really long story short, so when you think about addiction, at least from personal experience, my idea was that like what I was doing was not hurting anybody else, right? So in the back of my head, I forgot that I am A, one of 8 children, and B, my mother, who again has 8 children, found me dead when I was 17, and I didn't think about that. Again, because if you're in addiction, you're often concerned about yourself. So what Ryan was talking about is just looking for that next quick fix. And I know I could be, if I was in your shoes right now, I'd be thinking, oh, okay, like, this is not relevant to me. I thought the same exact thing. Like I said, I didn't necessarily have a horrible upbringing. I had plenty of surgeries from broken bones, which is often why people get prescribed opiates. But it could be as simple as like just somebody puts it in front of you is what it really comes down to. And you may think it's harmless, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it could be harmless. There are plenty of people who use opiates maybe 1 or 2 times a year, right? And it's nothing. That's unfortunately reality, because at the end of the day, drugs work. They can be enjoyable for a period of time, but the slippery slope is if you do not have the ability to turn that light switch off. You don't necessarily know until you try it. I'm not necessarily standing up here and telling anybody to try that. What this is more about is education and me trying to meet you guys where you're at and saying that I've been there. I've heard these speeches before. I didn't think it was relevant, but it often is. So fast forwarding to wherever I am today, like everybody up here, I am now actually, well, not like everybody up here, but I'm actually now a licensed drug and alcohol counselor and a licensed social worker at a detox facility in the middle of nowhere in Connecticut, Canaan, Connecticut. So I see this on a daily basis, right? So if somebody has a physical dependence upon opiates, it's not just with opiates. You can have a physical dependence on alcohol as well as benzodiazepines. You need a medical detox to safely get off that. So that's what I work with on a daily basis. And exactly what Ryan was saying, 90% of my job is meeting people where they're at, right? So you can be forced into treatment like I was for legal reasons. I didn't really want to go into the legal thing because it's not relevant to the opiate part. But people can be mandated to get sober or clean for legal reasons, or just to get people off their back, or for their spouse. But at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't think that they have a problem and they don't have the willingness to try, they're most likely not going to do anything. So for me, I turned it around. It'll be 6 years in a few weeks. But the only reason I did that is because I was really at what's called like an emotional bottom, right? So I had dug myself into this huge hole of, honestly, just like isolation and depression. I hated myself. Looking back when I was 17, I was 100% trying to kill myself. So I was really, really lonely. And what Mrs. Gehan was talking about of just like asking or talking to somebody is way easier said than done. I know that from personal experience. It's terrifying. And a lot of the people who use substances, they want to be alone. I preferred to be alone when I was using drugs. I didn't really like people. So yeah, I mean, talking about it if possible, and really just asking questions or finding somebody that you trust, right? So I think it's cool for me, at least because I'm 27 and I'm a licensed clinician. I think I have a pretty good ability to connect with people on a one-on-one level, opposed to if you go to a therapist's office and they're 45 years old and they kind of just look at you and you want to fall asleep. So finding somebody that you can connect with and just talk about it. Because it takes a good amount of courage to ask for help, and it's not always necessarily very easy. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of just rambled for like 10 minutes. I'm trying to give you guys the elevator version. But yeah, we're going to pass it.
Sean, you ready?
You guys hear me okay? Yep. Okay, I can see some heads nodding. So first of all, I wasn't able to hear everything that has been said so far, but I do know, without having to have heard everything, that I just want to talk about the courage that the last speaker had and that Betsy had to share their stories, because those are really hard and not easy. And I think it's easy for you guys to be sitting in the audience tonight and thinking, well, it's not going to be me, or that's not going to happen to anybody that I love. And I think it's important for you to realize just how wrong that is. Because, as was probably said, nobody ever expects that this is going to be them or that somebody that they love. But this is a disease that impacts 1 in 4 people in some way in our country. And whether those people know that or not is a different story. But it's there. It's impacted my own family very closely. And I've seen it with my own eyes. And it's the reason why I do the work that I do, because too often people like my own family members are ignored when it comes to trying to solve these problems. And we all too often, you see things in our community to help people who have cancer get the treatment that they deserve, or somebody who has heart disease or diabetes, and there's telethons and celebrities get behind these things. But more often than not, you don't see a ton of attention paid to this because sometimes people are ashamed about this and they don't get the help that they deserve. And so that's why it's so incredible to see some of the speakers that you have tonight telling their story. Betsy in particular is somebody who I've worked with for the last 6 years on this issue. She stood next to me while the governor has signed bills that I've introduced that really have one purpose, which is to make sure that we don't lose any more people like Martine to this disease. And so, as probably been said before, and I won't speak for very long because I know you're at the end of your program and we want to take some questions, but we have a big problem in this state. And the problem has frankly gotten worse since the last time we did this discussion because obviously during the coronavirus, we've had 2 different significant health challenges happening. Number one is the actual health challenge posed by coronavirus. And the other health challenge is the one dealing with mental health. And in a lot of ways, and I've been saying this for a year now, more people will be touched by mental health challenges than physical health when it comes to coronavirus from a statistical perspective. And yet we pay a lot more attention to coronavirus, which is great because coronavirus obviously is a very big problem and we are taking it very seriously. But the mental health aspect of this continues to be like it always is, which is sort of pushed aside and disregarded. We had 10% more people overdose and die in our state in 2020 than we did in 2019, which was the first year in a while that the number has actually gone up. In the last couple of years, the number, fortunately, thanks to a lot of the work that my colleagues and I have done, the numbers have gone down. But because of the pandemic, because people didn't have access to the services that get them to be better, because people were dealing with stress, and when stress comes into somebody's life, that disease sort of rears its ugly head and says, hey, I have a suggestion of how you can cope with that stress, and it's called feeding my disease. That causes significant problems for people, and we've seen a significant uptick in the number of people who are overdosing, going to emergency rooms, trying to get treatment. So where do we go from here? Well, we go in the way that we've been going before, which is to sort of listen to some of the folks that you've heard from tonight, whether they're like Ryan on the front lines on the EMS side, Officer Shove on the law enforcement side, George talking about what he's seeing. All of these things, we take suggestions from people and then we go forward. But for you, the most important thing that I can try to leave you with is to know that number one, it's okay not to be okay. And if you or anybody you know is experiencing a substance use disorder, then you should absolutely ask for help. Do not be ashamed of that. It's a disease, just like heart disease, just like cancer. Number two, if someone you know or love is struggling with something, don't ever hesitate to try to get that person help because you can literally save their life. And it could be the difference between them surviving or not. And I know, especially when you're in high school like you guys are, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do that. You're certainly worried that your friend might be mad at you or that it might hurt your friendship or people might not think that you're cool. But none of that will matter if a friend of yours dies, a loved one of yours dies. That is not the right thing to do. And so you should always feel free to get help. And then the last thing I would say is do your part to end the stigma of mental health and addiction. All of you are leaders in your church, in your community, in your school in some way, and all of us have a responsibility and a role to play when it comes to breaking down that stigma so that people don't feel afraid to get help. and that people don't feel like they are somehow less than somebody else because they're struggling with this. That is how we can save lives. The laws that I've passed about limiting prescriptions to a certain amount of days, making Narcan more available, all these things certainly will help people, but nothing will help people more than all of us as a society being more willing to help see people for who they are, as people who are struggling with something that's very, very real and very, very challenging, and that they deserve the help they can get. Because until that happens, it will continue to be okay for those people to be discriminated against by big insurance companies, by big institutions, and just sort of cast into shadows. And when that happens, more often than not, they're in a much, much worse position in terms of actually managing or treating that disease than they would be if people were there to help them. And so I think I'll stop there and just say thank you all for being a part of this tonight. Thank you to the panelists who I've been on this panel with before for helping do what you can in your respective role to help solve this crisis. And I just want to thank Claire and St. George for putting this on again.
Hey, Sean. So obviously our whole goal, right, is I don't want to have to tell your parents, I don't want to have to tell your loved ones that somebody's dead, right? That's one of the worst things that we do. Joanne's talked about that. George has talked about him having to deal with people at the funeral home and dealing with that aftermath. The goal of this is to stop it before it starts. And for whatever reason, and Tim did an excellent job talking about his experiences and everything like that. But if we can prevent, the possibility of the addiction or anything like that, is just huge. So Sean said it a bunch. If you know a friend that's struggling, whether it's with depression, whether it's with drugs, whether it's with self-harm, that's not one of those things that you just want to keep to yourself. You want to tell your teacher, tell the resource officer, tell somebody else. Don't carry that burden, right? We want to make sure that people get help, people are offered help, and we're taking care of it, kind of thing. Also, parents and you guys, if you know you have extra prescriptions inside your house, right? The police station has a place to actually bring those prescriptions that are no longer being used. That's right in the lobby. Is that still available? Still available? Are you guys, your lobby's open? So parents who are watching and everybody else, if you know that you have all these old medications and stuff like that, don't just end the temptation, prevent any problems that might arise. Take them down to the police station, put them in the secure box. But if anybody has any questions, I don't know if Zoom has, are they able to ask questions? Okay. Any of you guys have any questions? Could be for anybody up here. So I'm gonna repeat the question real quick, just so people who are watching can see. So the question was asking Tim about his situation and what led him to try harder drugs beyond marijuana, as marijuana is obviously much more socially acceptable and okay these days. But what made you go beyond that?
I thought I briefly touched upon it in the quick little blurb I had, but I mean, there's a couple different reasons. The big one was just like availability, as well as, after a certain amount of time when you smoke a significant amount of marijuana, maybe I grew out of it. It got a little boring, but it really came down to the people I was hanging out around. It was just around me, and at the end of the day, some of it was curiosity. You see stuff on movies and on the internet, and you're just kind of like, at least if you're anything like me, you're just thinking, what's the big deal? What's the harm? And that's what I thought I brought up. Like, there are plenty of people who can try things once or twice and leave it alone. And that's where the whole debate of like this genetic predisposition, I'm not trying to stray away from the question, but it really was just put in front of me, unfortunately, is the quick response. But again, a lot of it was curiosity, and maybe I got bored of just smoking weed at some point. But also my inhibitions were like out the window. When you smoke weed, you don't necessarily think like, oh, that's cocaine. It's not a good thing. It's like, oh, that's cocaine. I'm already high on marijuana. Why not? Type of deal. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but yeah, that's that. Yeah. That's my bedtime too. I get it.
So I just want to say one thing to you guys and everybody that's at home. You might be asking the question, why are we doing this at confirmation class? Why does this belong here? Well, if you think about what we talk about, especially in the high school program, is how to live as Catholic Christians. And just about every person that spoke tonight talked about watch out for your friends. You know, that's what we're supposed to do as Catholics. We're supposed to take care of each other. It's our job. And Jesus has told us that many, many times. So this is this wonderful panel of volunteers who speak every 2 years to every 9th and 10th grade student. This is what they're here to do, to take care of you guys, your friends, your families, just to make you aware of what can and does happen. So please heed the advice of everyone up here. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. You know, we each get one life, one body to take care of. So make sure that you guys do that, okay? And I appreciate everybody so much for being here. And again, every 2 years, this group of people is here just to make sure they touch every single student at St. George Church. And please, those at home, if you have questions that I know that the live stream, you can't answer questions, you can't ask questions, please just email me or text me and I will get the questions to the panelists. And it can be anonymous if you choose, or you can have a conversation with them yourselves, okay? Thank you for those of us who came out tonight. Not too many in person tonight, I'm a little surprised, but hopefully everyone else is live streaming and you all were able to hear these wonderful people speak just to help us all. Thank you so much, and have a great night. I think we're done. Hi, Sean. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Good night. Bye.
Good night. Take care. Thank you all so much.